Our next speaker is going to be with us, not in person, but and it's appropriate that he's here with us because of his work in augmented reality. I'll tell you in a moment why he's not here. Micah Taylor is a postdoctoral researcher for the Earth Systems Predictability and Resiliency Group at the Pacific Northwest National Laboratory. He specializes in environmental communication technology, which you're going to get to see firsthand, geographic information science, and environmental psychology. I'm proud to say that he was a PhD recipient in environmental design from the University of Georgia College of Environmental Design in 2022. And his dissertation research was on developing a mobile app, augmented reality and data collection for environmental communication in coastal Georgia. In other words, we know our climate is changing, but how people perceive the future of environmental change and how they might adapt requires a deep engagement with the public so that people understand what we're talking about and what the future vision for this is. The app that he created is designed to capture both what residents and visitors have to say about the landscape, in particular about people who know deeply the history of that landscape and the features there, and also bringing in the impressions of people who are visiting for the first time and how they might have their own impressions of what's going on there. He did his work on the Altamaha Scenic Byway, which is down in coastal Georgia in the area of Darien, and certainly in the same landscapes that William Bartram knew and loved so well in the lower Altamaha. And so he's working on how public insight plus expert knowledge can lead to community-based versus top-down planning. Now, fittingly, Micah is not here. As I said, he's not here, and I'm not going to stand in for him. He's in Brazil. And when you work for the U.S. government and they say you're going to go to Brazil in August, then you get up and you go to Brazil. So he's going to be listening in, I think, on the web to this. And he fortunately has prepared his presentation in advance. So we will have the benefit of seeing him as if he were here with us via Zoom link. And
he's here in the chat.
And he's here. And so he's in Fortaleza, Brazil. And so I'm going to turn it over to Micah, and he's able to listen. So you can applaud the fact that William Bartram would have to have absolutely lie down and think about the opportunity to be connected from Athens, Georgia, which didn't even exist at that time, to Fortaleza, Brazil.
And so after the video is over, like I said, he is in the chat, so we'll be able to ask questions and I can read them back to you.
Everybody, my name is Micah Taylor, and I am a PhD graduate of the UGA College of Environment and Design program. I graduated in May 2022, and I'm going to be presenting about my dissertation project today and talking a little bit more about how it's related to Bartram Trail, specifically the historic markers along part of that trail. I wish I could have been there to present in person, but I had to rearrange some travel plans and it just didn't work out that way. But feel free to message me any questions after it's over, and I'll get back to you with it. So my project that I worked on for my dissertation, I worked on with Brian Orland, who's recently retired, Meredith Welch Devine in the graduate school, Stephen Berry in the history department, and Carrie Gochus in historic preservation. And we wanted to look at how emerging visualization technology, specifically augmented reality in this case, could be used in environmental communication, and to sort of have this two-way path between people using the technology in a specific place and what we could do with that information, specifically those stories. And this started with my interest in virtual reality when I first came into the program. So we built out a complete mock-up or a surrogate of Darien, Georgia, and McIntosh County in coastal Georgia in virtual reality. And so you would put this headset on and you could walk around in the town and interview these characters that were like the citizens of the town, and you could simulate sea level rise and see historic shorelines in certain places, and it allowed this interactivity to see environmental aspects of that community. And the idea that we could take this virtual reality program and be able to completely let someone change things within the community or contribute their own stories and insights and things like that. And from that, we learned that the problem is with virtual reality that you have to be in a place with this headset on, tethered to a computer, and it wasn't as easy to use as augmented reality. So what is augmented reality? Well, augmented reality, which typically works on your smartphone, is where you're placing objects in the real world you're looking at through the camera. So Pokemon Go, in this case, Pokemon's placed inside a real place, is the most popular. It could be like Instagram and Snapchat, where it recognizes your face and puts some filter, goofy face. Google Translate, which actually looks at text through your camera and can translate it to a different language. These are all examples of augmenting digital content onto a real place. So the opportunities for this VR and AR technology inside of environmental planning was we wanted to create an immersive world of a place. And with VR, you're kind of in a place that doesn't exist, but with AR, you are really in the place that you are, augmenting content onto that location. You could explore hypothetical situations without risk, really, because the digital content that's showing up in the scene that you're in isn't real. So there's a little bit of this deeper philosophy of it. It takes away the risk. Whereas with VR, you do have a little risk. People get sick inside the headset that they have to wear. They can trip and fall. It can be this whole sort of mental roller coaster inside of virtual reality that you don't have in the mobile-based augmented reality. And it also has the same function as the VR. You can allow people to alter the digital content, contribute text or voice that someone else could hear that's also experiencing that augmented reality at the same place. And there was examples of this already in the past. We just wanted to build on it for environmental communication. The first opportunity came around as part of the Scenic Byways proposal, and with Brian and Stephen and Meredith, we had this Mellon Foundation grant that the idea was someone could ride through coastal Georgia and through your phone see things that are historical or sort of these imagined future environmental scenarios, and then you could hear stories. So if you were driving, you would have the option to listen to it. And we even went so far as to consider the possibility that there would be smart windshields at some point, and where this content could be there while you're driving. And I've seen that in some cars where, like, the miles per hour, the speed that you're driving is displayed out in the windshield as this sort of hologram. And we started exploring these kind of ideas of if you're on a scenic byway and you're approaching a specific area, it would tell your phone, oh, they're in this area, this is a story in this area, and it would talk to you. Or if you weren't driving, show you some augmented content across the landscape at that location. And this wasn't a new idea. This kind of expanded on this idea of visitor-employed photography, where people would be out seeing a place just as you would with our conceptual application, but then you're contributing something else to it. And a lot of these type of extreme graphics and augmenting content that doesn't exist but in a place that does exist is popular in Hollywood. So it's kind of playing on this idea that, people like, Leonardo DiCaprio's depiction of climate change. They like these sort of end of times, extreme versions of climate change in Hollywood. And a lot of people watch those movies. So maybe that sort of popularity could roll over into real scenarios of climate change and storytelling of place in real places. And so we started testing the idea in McIntosh County in Darien, Georgia, which is where we built out the first virtual reality application. And so we built a mobile app where people could take their phone, download this app, and we had big printed pictures of sort of these historical and picturesque landscapes in McIntosh County. And when you point your phone at those pictures through the app, there would be content pop up as like this hologram next to the image that was like some historical environmental situation or historical view of that same area. And then a hypothetical future situation where there are more hurricanes and storms, and there might be a need to adapt to these climate related changes in some way. And using what we learned from having students test that application in the College of Environment and Design, we decided we needed to build it out for the real place. We need people to be able to download an app, physically be in McIntosh County and see these augmented futures and historical stories and even audio stories in the real place. So we started looking at the historic markers, a few of which I know have to do with the Bartram Trail story. And we started putting historical content that we could find as an augmented visual or audio that would pop up when you're at the sign. And we imagined some of these future situations with more climate change and flooding that we could also show there. And so we started exploring I believe there were 54 signs in all of McIntosh County. And we tried to come up with content and historical and imagined future stories for all of them. And the success of that technology and what we learned from the students led us to You Are Here, which was the big information product, you could say, of my dissertation project. So we released this You Are Here as a publicly available app to where you could go to any of the signs, historical markers in McIntosh County, hold your phone up, and it would show you on the left side some historical photo of that area, and on the right side, sort of this imagined future scenario with more climate-related problems, which is, certain to be part of, history in the future, especially in coastal regions. And we asked people in the same app to contribute a story that they know. What was their situation growing up there, or if they're traveling through, what's going on at that specific time, or do they have a story about environmental change or maybe misrepresented parts of history that they could contribute into the app. And the idea being that people could show up and hear or see that story that someone else contributed when they were traveling through. And it was supposed to work like a sort of like a tourism, like a crowdsourced tourism type of application, but then also a way to gather qualitative stories is actually data about places. And the way we did this was target-based augmented reality. So with augmented reality, you have different types. So with geolocation based, you can place things like the Pokemon animals that people play in the Pokemon Go game. You can just place them in the camera view. So it looks like they're standing in the street, that you're pointing the phone camera at. And then there's sort of these real world object placements where there's a latitude and longitude. So you have to be at this certain place on the planet, and then boom, this augmented content pops up. And then there's target based. So your camera finds an object that really exists, in this case, the historic markers in McIntosh County. And when it recognizes them, the augmented content and the whole experience and functionality appears for you there, which requires you to physically go to the place, which is, I thought was a pretty big deal for the project. You have to go there and be in the place, sort of telling a new story and experiencing someone else's story. And so we got this augmented reality engine, they call it, called Wikitude Studio, which was out of Europe, and it let us upload a very high quality image of all the historic markers. So me and Brian Orland went down and took really detailed photos of all the historic markers. You load them into this engine, and it registers it inside of the app as something that can be recognized. When the screen recognizes it, makes something happen. So through a lot of work with various people in the graduate program and master's students, we went and collected historical information, anything we could find to sort of prime the app for news stories from the users. And we had that on the left side of the historic marker. And on the right side, Jingshan Lee, who's another PhD student, I think about to graduate if she's not already graduated. And she sort of helped us develop these imagined future scenarios where there's increased heat, there's more hurricanes, there's sea level rise, all these things that are expected to be part of the environmental situation at the coast going forward. And with that, we were able to create the app. And we had a lot of content. It was fun and interesting. I learned a lot about coastal Georgia doing this type of work. So we would show historic buildings that had been there during the times of, shrimp boats and logging coming into port in Darien, to what would it be like if these areas were torn up by hurricanes? How do you preserve these historic things that are still there from that time, knowing that threats are coming? So sort of a digital preservation idea. We had stories of like forts and things that existed in that area at the time, and then now they're ports, right? Ports that have experienced flooding and might need some environmental intervention to protect it, or perhaps just be prepared for it to not exist anymore. And so for all the markers that were there, we managed to come up with a historic and future story that someone could experience when they went. And I think there were 54 markers. I know one of them got hit by a car and we found it knocked over in the grass, and there were a couple that weren't there. But for the most part, the markers existed across that county. Some of them you got to really drive out to remote areas to get to, but they were there. And the biggest part of the app, really what made this different than other image collection projects, that I had found in my research, was that we're asking people to contribute their story. And so there was a website that accompanied the app that was basically, the theme of that website is, we cannot see what you see. Tell us what you see when you're there. Tell us what kind of environmental situations you experienced growing up in this area. What stories do you not typically hear in the history of this place? And assuming that they were appropriate to be heard, the idea was we would push them back out to the app. So if someone else visited that sign, they could hear that story, read that story, look at the pictures, possibly even see those images augmented in that space, right? Which sort of levels the playing field, I would say, on who gets to tell stories at these famous locations. And for the research part of it, of course, in the PhD program, you're digging a little deeper than just building an app. So we did an analysis by asking people that had used the app about their environmental attitudes, is what it's termed in the literature, but basically asking them, does this make you think any different about climate change? Does this seem like a tool that you would use to tell your story and expect people to come hear it? And or even as specific as, do you think that the weather and the climate of coastal Georgia is changing? And does this make you have more conversations or think any differently than the way you've thought about it? And it was sort of along this timeline of the preservationists, of like, we should leave nature alone. This is something that's happening to nature. Or the other end of the spectrum being like utilization, like we're meant to use nature, and if climate change gets bad, we'll figure out how to deal with it with engineering, science, and technology. And we tried to measure people's attitudes after using the app along those lines. And what we found was there people were still not completely able to say, hey, I believe that climate change is real and things are going to change in the future for worse or the better. But there was a strong shift towards concern about the economic consequences of hurricanes, because tourism, shrimping, and a lot of stuff dealing with the coastal waterways is a big deal in places like Darien, Georgia. And so there was a concern for that because they had experienced these kinds of things in the past. And there was also a strong shift in confidence in a resilient future. This idea that science and engineering will fix whatever the problems are, because that's always been the case. But the biggest takeaway was that people, after using the app, and then we went and interviewed them afterwards, or they had contributed a story to the app, they would tell us about these crazy stories where, like, this road flooded. I've lived here my whole life, and this is the only time it flooded, and we couldn't get to the hospital. Or the road out to my house on such and such island, it floods every time there's a high tide now. That wasn't the case in the past. And there were cases of people telling us stories of storms taking away their property or their neighbor's property. And it sort of brought out these stories that are related to environmental damage from climate change that they previously weren't ready to talk about after using the app. It's not necessarily that the app made them believe in climate change and want to take action, but it's certainly the visuals and the audio inside the app of environmental change in history and in the future spawned them to tell us a story about something they had experienced in the place. And yeah, so I think the apps, or the concept of this app, it facilitated this crowdsourced storytelling with mobile technology. It's accessible with a smartphone. So a lot of communities and groups of people that wouldn't have access to that technology, but a big portion of the population does. Definitely going to reach more people than virtual reality, where you have to be at a place with a computer. Someone has to wear a headset and learn how to use it. And I think it's a good case study for environmental communicators specifically who want to develop tools that could help tell the story of a place and sort of historically document the history of a place. And what's next? Well, the biggest on the what's next list is the third bullet point there that says similar applications in this area, which is what I wanted to end with today, is what we learned from this whole process of the project is the app could use a redesign that promotes natural adoption. So I did have to reach out and get people to download and use the app. I had some that did it on their own based on flyers that I hung up around Darien, Georgia. But figuring out how to make the app something that people want to use, they can see the fun or the benefit or something about it that makes them want to use it themselves. And there's a lot of research in this, especially in user experience design, and some of the big tech companies have sort of figured that out. And making it more specific or less specific. We're still in this place where it's like, could this be strictly for environmental applications, or could it be less specific? Like, just tell us your story of this place. And is that still useful? Do people want to use it? Maybe it becomes as specific as saying, this is for Bartram Trail. Tell us what you learned about Bartram Trail, or give us some feedback about this experience. And a big one is maintenance and management. So the app more than likely will not work on most phones that have come out in the last year. This technology changes so fast that there needs to be some entity that can maintain it and update it and manage it and redesign it beyond the life of, say, my PhD program. And that's typically how things work. A lot of applications out there, well, there's a background of people that can manage it and keep it going. And there's also ethical considerations, like what types of things should people contribute? I've heard stories about people creating these AI figures of people that are dead and gone, and they show up at concerts or they show up in phone apps, and the family's like, I don't know if I like that, if I like this artificial intelligence version of my mother singing on a stage. And there's also, there would need to be some vetting of content. So if people put something that's just factually untrue, like, do we want to allow that through an application like this? These are some of the considerations for another version of the app that I think are needed. So version 2, where does it live? That's something that some of you here today may have an idea for. Is there somebody that can fund and house and maintain this app so it can live on, and aid in redesigning it to be something that people want to use, sort of playing into that. How do we make people see the benefit of an application like this? And what do we do with the information? Right. I think that's another conversation. Like, all these stories are contributed to an app. Is it just for the sake of the app, just because they're there and people can hear it when they visit these markers? Or do we take that information and try to push some change in history and preservation and planning and politics? And then, yeah, I think wherever it goes next, it needs to be in a position to upgrade, because not only does places change across the landscape and the stories continue on, but the technology has increased so much that what augmented reality could do today is probably 2 times more advanced than what it could do when we first built this application. And so wherever it goes next needs to be ready to upgrade with new technologies. And that's some of the ideas that I had for it. And yeah, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me.
Okay. Did anybody have any questions? He's in the chat. Yeah, go ahead.
If I go to Darien and see one of these markers, can I do this thing, or is it dead?
He's asking, is this actually still working in Darien? Could he go there and use it right now, or is it kind of on pause or dead? Or oh, he's going to be there in 2 weeks. Going to test it out. Waiting to see if he yeah, he says I'm Sarah. He says it's called UARHERE is the name, and it's still there. Like YOUARHERE.
You are here.
Yes.
Yes.
Fascinating. Stuff when you talk about democratizing the access to this information, but as a storyteller who works with mission-based content, I'm also kind of concerned about.
I wonder if he should just come up here. Yeah, come on up here, because so you could, because I don't think he can hear if it's gonna be that long, because yeah, he can't. And he also said, depending on your phone, it might not work because of updates that have not been made. But yeah, if you come right up here and speak into this, so he can actually, yeah. Hello.
I'm fascinated by this concept, and I think it's a great opportunity to democratize access to information. But I also deeply appreciate the ethical concerns that you put forward near the end. And as someone who works with storytelling, specifically, documentary and mission-based storytelling, I'm concerned about people misinterpreting things as being absolute facts when they may be more subjective or be more a curated experience. How are we overcoming the fact that this is offering interpretations of a place, its past, its present, its future, instead of being a depiction of absolutes?
He's thinking.
He's typing.
And he's typing. He's typing and thinking.
I mean, could I unmute you and you talk? Would you like
No.
to talk? Oh,
Well, I think, let's see.
because
The short answer is
the short answer is we are not.
we are not.
I could talk. Let me see if I can actually get you.
He said he can talk if it's possible. We're just watching, we're right here on the cutting edge of.
See if you can unmute yourself.
Can you hear me?
Yep. Yeah, we got you.
Okay.
All right, cool. Is it loud enough in there?
Yeah, let me turn this down a little bit.
Okay.
There we go. All right, you should be good.
Yeah, thanks for the question. The short answer is we weren't. We knew we weren't going to allow anybody to put nude photos or just something terrible up there. But as far as absolutes or what types of stories can be in and can be out, it was not really decided when we released that prototype, because when it came time to actually collect data and have this thing be out in McIntosh County, we just wanted people to use it. We were just trying to get some story, specifically something that was in the, in the same line as the story of climate change. And, we didn't get anything that was factually untrue. We got some really strong opinions about climate change in some cases. But yeah, depending on which direction, like another version of the app would take, I would like to see another version of it, then the kind of things you brought up would need to be considered. Like, are we allowing people to tell their own version of history, and who's going to sort of watch over that? And who is the authority that gets to say what is and what isn't? Those are big ethical things that would need to be considered. But for the first part, we were just like, okay, out of everything everybody contributed, or anything that we learned from interviewing the people that used it, was there anything environmental, like someone saying, hey, this is something about the environment or the weather or the landscape that's changing that I did not see in the past? We were specifically looking for that.
Thank you, Micah. Yes, Ian.
Steve Berry is a good friend of mine. He's a Civil War historian. How did he get involved with this?
How about
So what was the name again?
Steve Berry's
Steve Berry.
involvement? And
How did he get
since
involved?
He's an historian, and Ian Harden is asking, how did you get Steve involved with this, since it seems like he lives in the past, but I may be, but he does.
Yeah. Well, part of it was, showing historical photos and sort of telling the history of places that are talked about in those markers. But I know Brian and Meredith and Steve had worked on similar projects like this probably long before I came along. So they were pivotal in setting it up, for sure. They were pivotal in getting the grant money and helping me come up with the idea of history tied to stories, tied to imagined futures, tied to this crowdsourced storytelling. And Steve has some brilliant ideas for a second version of the app too, I might add, if you talk to him about it.
We'll take one more question. Yes, Jim.
Has this ever been hacked, and how do you prevent it?
Has this ever been hacked, and how would you prevent that?
It's not been hacked. Once I got the prototype built, I know enough to build something like this and make it work on my phone in my office to test it. But when we got ready to release it to the public, we hired a local developer, Adam, and his last name is blanking on me right now. But Adam lives there in Athens, and he is a really experienced developer, and he built it out that way. What I made basically would work on every device. So there's just so many types of phones. There's so many browsers. There's so many, updates that happen with operating systems and types of phones. So he sort of fixed it to work publicly for us. And inside of that, where it sits in the background is behind an Amazon server. And on a very, very tech level, without, getting too specific, that Amazon server has really, really good security. And so, there's a lot of anybody doing a lot of pushing data out and pulling data back in with technology is using Amazon's web services to do that, and they're very secure. I know we use it at the job I work at right now, and so far I've not seen anything hacked. But it doesn't mean it can't happen. So.
All right. Well, Micah, we really appreciate you taking the time out. Lots of applause.
Yeah. All right. I wish I could have been there.
I know, but so far you haven't figured out how to be in two places at once physically. But we
Not yet.
appreciate you being here, and we'll put up a big poster of you next time. So thank you so
Sounds
much.
good.
We hope you'll be here with us next time. You brought us into the space age and all of that with Beyond the Marker.
Well, my email, I'll be sure and get it out to everybody that's there. So if you have more questions, just feel free to reach out.
All right. Thank you so much, and enjoy your time in Brazil. Have some cachaça.
Oh,
All
yeah.
right.
Ciao, ciao. Bye-bye.
All right.